Hi, everybody. So, we have gained enough knowledge by now to prepare a basic HTML page, right? So, that means it's now time to create a form in HTML. Form pages are the pages that we use to request data from users on, well, it can be on any topic, really. Now, we'll encounter these kind of structures, well, probably daily, right? For example, the fields that we enter in places like Facebook and mail, etc. Those are all form fields. So let's talk about the properties of form structures. So to create the form structure, we'll first open and close the form tag, and then we can write the tags that we want to between them. A form will take different types of input from the users, and this can be information such as username, phone, mail address, date, color, whatever. And then we can get a whole bunch of different type of information just by using the input tag with type attribute. So the input tag is a single use tag that is not closed. So let's better understand the form entries on the application in Atom. So when starting Atom, just create an HTML file like we always do and call it form practice. So press the tab by typing HTML behind it, and let's see that we have the main information required for HTML. So get the title form practice, insert our form tag into the body tag. Now, of course, you're wondering what the action and method attributes are, but I find it a little better to explain them in the following chapters rather than now, so stick around. So first, let's just examine the different types of input tags. We mentioned that there are different user information inputs like text and password, email, date, buttons, radios, and we have seen that we get these different data input fields by changing the type attribute. So we can save our changes and see what's happening on our HTML page. So now we can create a meaningful form page with this and other similar tags. We have identified some fields with the input tag for our form page, but it's not really clear what purpose these fields are they? Is it? Mm-mm. So we need to give some meaning to this field. For example, we want it to be for a username and password fields on our form. So we can do this in two ways. First, go to the input tag and add a placeholder attribute to tell the user what this field is used for. And secondly, we can use the label tag to tell the user what purpose we want him to use it for. So how do we determine which label tag belongs to which input field? To do this, we've got two different ways. First, we'll add the input tag between the label tag to which it belongs. And let's make this the username. Now for the second input, we'll add the for attribute to the label tag and the ID attribute to the input tag. For example, let's declare that both are associated with a password field. In fact, when we look here, nothing changes from the user's point of view, but for the developer, it is important to specify which tag is associated with which field in order to avoid confusion. Now, as we approach this step for sending the data, we'll need to make sure that we receive information from the users in a complete and accurate format. So format control is already doing HTML for us according to the input type that we've added. For fields that we want to be completed, we'll just add the required attribute in the input tag. For example, suppose that we do not want the username to be empty, and for that, we'll just write the required property in this input tag. So let's save it and refresh our page. Now press the Submit button without entering a username, and see, as you can see, the system gave us a warning. Good. So now let's do the format test. We can use an email field for this. So each email address has an @ sign, right? So enter the mail address without putting the @ sign, and what happens when you press the Submit button. As you can see, the system gave us warning again, and it's not even about the @ sign, right? If that's the only criteria, because even if we just put the @ sign, what happens? We are still warned when the continuation is not similar to the email address. Now let's have a look at the radio buttons and check boxes that we usually encounter on many forms. And we can have a look at their working logic. Now, as you may be able to predict, to be able to add a radio or a checkbox, all we have to do is just add the input tags with the attributes, which are radio button or checkbox. Checkboxes are often used to ask if a situation exists alone, where radio buttons are typically used to selectively choose between a couple of different options. Therefore, radio buttons are generally used in pairs. For example, suppose that this form is filled out by parents, and let's have the following question: are you a mother or a father? So we want the person filling out the form to choose one of these two options, right? But as you can see, both the mother and father radio buttons can be selected at the same time. Well, we're not going to want that to happen. So if we go step by step, we first add the tags to these radio buttons. And again, we'll connect them with each other as we did before. But we're still able to choose both at the same time. So to avoid this, we need to add the name attribute. So by adding the same value to the name attribute, we can tell the system that these two radio buttons are together. So let's save it and refresh our page, and we can see that we can now choose one of the two options. Cool. So now that we've learned how to use radio buttons, and radio buttons are generally used for a single selection. That leads us to check boxes. So check boxes, we can make single or multiple choices with check boxes. Now to add our checkbox to our form, all we need to do is set the type attribute of our input tag to checkbox. Ask the parent, how many children do you have? We can ask our question and then create the options 1, 2, 3. And as we can see, when we save and refresh our application, the options have occurred. As we can see, it came up as 1 by default. And we did this using the checked property in the input tag. So we determine the name values of the check boxes under the same group in the same way. Select tag in our next selection tag and select tag, create drop-down list. And we can add list elements using the option tag inside the select tag. Make our previous example with the select tag and see what changes that we will now encounter. And what do you see? We have a drop-down list, and we can easily make our selection from this list. So finally, let's have a little chat about our text area tag. So it's actually a text field that we will frequently encounter, and it offers multiple lines of text. So we can, in other words, add more text into it. So let's add a text area and see how it works. So here we can talk about rows and cols attributes. With the values that we give to these attributes, we can determine the size of our text field. And now, to wrap up our lesson, let's just talk briefly about the action and method attributes. So we specify the URL address that we will send this information with the action method, and when we press the submit button. Now, the information that we enter is sent to this address, so let's give the URL address of the Wikipedia page here. And as we can see, we are redirected to the Wikipedia page when we press the submit button. Now, we determine whether the information that we send with the method attribute will be sent with the get method or the post method. In fact, we have created a structure where we can get user information with HTML, and we can do the operations related to this information with JavaScript. But for now, this will be enough for HTML. We'll talk in much greater detail about CSS and JavaScript later. But in this lesson, we talked about the details of creating a form. And in our next lesson, we can create a form page that we will prepare and use everything that we've learned so far. So until then, goodbye, and see you in the next lesson.